Morning breaks over Boston on June 17, 1775. As British General William Howe looks out from the city, he sees a heavily fortified earthen wall sitting right on top of Breed's Hill. It had not been there the day before. He makes a quick calculation. Howe commands thousands of highly disciplined professional soldiers. To him, the solution is obvious. March straight up the hill in tight formation and take the position by sheer force. But how did a militia of untrained farmers manage to build a fortress entirely undetected? Why did a seasoned British general choose to walk his men directly into an uphill crossfire? And how did a few hours on this hill chart the course of the American Revolution? Howe's reliance on traditional European military tactics clouded his judgment. He assumed a show of overwhelming professional force would make an amateur militia run. He was walking into a trap of his own making. This map shows Boston and its harbor in 1775, essentially an island connected by a narrow strip. North sits the Charlestown Peninsula, with significant elevation. If colonial forces placed cannons on those heights, the British Navy below would be sitting ducks. On the night of June 16th, colonial orders were to secure Bunker Hill, but Colonel William Prescott, leading a force of 1,200 militiamen, made a rogue call. He pushed his men forward to Breed's Hill, aggressively close to the British guns. Working in complete darkness, the men dug for their lives. Using picks and shovels, they moved tons of earth to construct a formidable defensive redoubt, racing to finish before the sun came up and exposed their position. By placing his fort right in the face of the British forces, Prescott forced Howe's hand. The colonial militia was too close to ignore. The British had to remove them, and they had to do it in broad daylight. By early afternoon, Howe's men begin their ascent. They march under the summer sun in their bright red coats, stepping to the beat of drums in perfect, unyielding lines. The British High Command expects this visual alone to do the heavy lifting. In European warfare, amateur troops usually scatter when confronted by a wall of advancing bayonets. Here is the stark resource reality. Left, thousands of British targets. Right, the militia's limited gunpowder. They couldn't fire at will. To compensate, every shot must connect. Holding fire until seeing the whites of their eyes was mathematical. As distance shrinks, hit probability spikes. This initial clash is entirely dictated by these opposing strategies. The British rely on overwhelming psychological pressure, while the colonists execute extreme, calculated resource conservation. The colonists wait until the redcoats are within 50 paces, and then they fire all at once. The impact is catastrophic. Entire rows of British regulars collapse, turning their perfectly ordered ranks into chaotic fragments. The survivors retreat, reform, and try again, only to be shredded by a second volley. Down below, the British officers watch in disbelief. In a matter of minutes, hundreds of their most elite professional soldiers are killed or wounded by a ragtag force of civilians. General Howe orders a third desperate charge up the hill, but this time the colonial supply of powder and shot finally empties out. The guns fall silent. With nothing left to shoot, the militia resort to throwing rocks and swinging the heavy wooden stocks of their muskets. The battle degrades into brutal hand-to-hand combat as the British swarm over the earthen walls. The British take the hill, but only because the colonists ran out of ammunition. The defensive strategy held. The math just ran dry before the redcoats did. By the end of the afternoon on June 17th, the physical objective is achieved. The British force captures Breed's Hill, and the Union Jack flies over the Charlestown Peninsula. But this bar chart reveals the devastating cost of that real estate. When we compare the sheer volume of casualties, the British suffer over 1,000 killed or wounded. That's nearly half their attacking force. Colonial losses sit around 450. If these loss ratios are projected forward onto future battles, the British military presence in North America will simply bleed out. When this data reaches London, it causes widespread panic. For General Howe, the reality is stark. They cannot afford to fight at this rate. For the colonists, this staggering body count serves as a lethal proof of concept. They now have undeniable evidence that farmers and tradesmen, armed with hunting weapons and a defensive advantage, can stand toe-to-toe with a global superpower and exact a terrible toll. That realization hardens the militia's resolve. The psychological boost sustains them through the long, freezing months of the Boston siege, ultimately forcing the British to evacuate the city the following March. The afternoon on Breed's Hill proves that neither side is going to fold easily. The British learned the heavy price of American territory, and the colonists realize they can actually survive the fight. This mutual understanding guarantees a long, brutal conflict, one that will inevitably escalate onto the global stage at a place called Saratoga.